Thomas the Tank Engine is an iconic childhood character that we have all collectively transformed into something else entirely. Something made to cause laughter, or even something made to be feared. Memes, mashups, drawings, physical creations, original animations. To better understand how we got here, we have to examine the franchise's history, starting from the beginning. The Railway series by the Reverend Wilbert Awdry was first published in 1945, but the concepts emerged years prior, when his 2-year-old son, Christopher, was going through a measles recovery. To lift his spirits, Wilbert shared this rhyme with his son. Early in the morning, down at the station, all the little engines, standing in a row. Along comes the driver, pulls the little lever, puff puff, chuff chuff, off we go. And being a curious child, Christopher would ask his father questions about these engines. As a result, Wilbert came up with a short story, Edward's Day Out, which focused on Edward the Blue Engine, the smallest engine in the yard, and how he was given the opportunity to prove himself despite the bullying of the larger engines. Wilbert would soon after create 2 other stories introducing the characters of Gordon, Henry, and the Fat Director alongside Sodor, the fictional island that hosts the tales. Seeing how much their son enjoyed this, Wilbert's wife motivated him to seek out a publisher so that other kids can experience these stories as well. He eventually struck a deal with the firm Edmund Ward, who requested another story to bring all the engines onto a single railway. These stories put together would make up 1945's The 3 Railway Engines, which would be a big success partially because most other children's books at the time didn't have nearly as much color as this one. Something else that helped it stand out was the fact that characters weren't morally perfect. They weren't created with the sole purpose of teaching a lesson. Wilbert grew up reading stories of perfect children, stories that were meant to preach. He didn't want that for his tales. The characters messed up, misbehaved. Yes, they would end up getting punished, but the main objective was not to provide moral guidance. Despite being engines, they had more human elements compared to other children's tales. The reason for this is that, when he was a child, Wilbert personified the steam engines he encountered. The way they would whistle and puff, as if they were speaking to each other, as if they had their own personalities. Making the characters feel realistic in that manner was a goal of his. However, even considering how well received this book was, it was missing something. Edward, Gordon, and Henry were fine characters, but the story needed a star. 3 years ago at that point, for Christmas, Wilbert gifted his son a custom-made wooden train engine toy that would go on to be named Thomas. Christopher loved Thomas so much so that he requested he be in more of his father's stories. So naturally, the second book to release was titled Thomas the Tank Engine. The series went on until Wilbert retired in 1972. Fortunately, his son was now an adult and more than a decade later would take his father's place as the author of the books. He worked on the series until the very last one in 2011, appropriately titled Thomas and His Friends, referencing the now famous show based on the books. Even though the program formally debuted in 1984, plans for a TV series actually began way back in 1953. That's when the BBC aired a live pilot of The Sad Story of Henry. Unfortunately, the broadcast didn't go well, as the model trains were clunky and didn't appear to move realistically on the tracks. At one point, Henry even derailed, causing a crew member to physically put their hand in the frame to reposition him. Wilbert Awdry was mortified over how it went and would denounce the production as unprofessional. Needless to say, the following episode would be delayed and then cancelled altogether. Professionalism is an important aspect of creation, especially nowadays. That's why I'm a big fan of Elgato's microphone lineup. Once upon a time, I too had to just rely on a crunchy headset microphone. Now, I use the Wave DX and Wave XLR, but but they also have other quality mics that are plug and play. On top of that, there's the free audio mixing software Wavelink that really takes these mics to the next level. If you're a content creator yourself, or you just want to sound better on your calls, Elgato has what you need. So if you're in the market for an upgrade, I highly recommend you use my link down below to check out all that Elgato has to offer. Thank you again to them for sponsoring us, and thank you for listening. Now, back to the video. Even though the last TV series attempt was a failure, there was another effort in 1973. But Wilbert was understandably hesitant about it, especially because this one would have relied on American funds. He would say that once the Americans get hold of it, the whole series would be vulgarized and ruined. He was eventually convinced to greenlight a pilot where the engines were presented as 2D cutouts. However, the production studio pulled the plug on it as they didn't believe the books were popular enough outside the UK. It wasn't until 1979 that a third attempt at a television series was made. After a few years of gathering both funds and a top-notch crew, the show began production in 1983 after a successful internal pilot, and in the following year would air the very first episode of Thomas and Friends. The first episodes were met with praise and got even more attention due to the narration from former Beatles member Ringo Starr. A few years later, the series would be shown in the US through the Shining Time station program, causing an uptick in popularity in the States. There were some key differences between the two versions, as the US would change episode titles, dialogue, and tone. For example, the fat conductor is referred to as Sir Topham Hatt. Thomas, the star of the show, is presented as a kinder and more friendly engine. Episodes would also lean more into certain themes like friendship and teamwork, so that children could take away more positive aspects than the original. Although, this is a point of contention for viewers, as the original version is often closer to the source material. Over the years, the show would go through two key phases, the first being the introduction of CGI in 2008, where the engine models were still in place, but the faces would be computer animated, alongside all the human characters. Then, in an effort to save money, the show became fully CGI the following year. This would be the norm until the final episode in 2021. The series would then be rebooted later that year into a full 2D animated series that hasn't really been received well. Ever since the very first book, Thomas and Friends has become increasingly popular. From way back in 1957, when the first piece of merchandise was sold, to 1966, when the first functional commercial toy model was created, all the way to the present, where a Thomas franchise toy is sold somewhere in the world every 2 seconds. This growth in popularity was accelerated in 2011, after the franchising rights were bought by the second biggest toy manufacturing company at the time, Mattel. The franchise now draws in an estimated over 1.5 million every year. As for its influential value, Christopher Audrey has cited a study that asked children to draw a train, and most of them, 95%, drew a steam train. That's despite that type of train being an almost non-existent vehicle in this day and age. That's the reach that Thomas and Friends have, an appeal that crosses generations. Everything has had a lasting impact, from the characters, the sets, the stories, to the music, especially the iconic theme song, composed of piano and even actual train sounds. So it makes sense that the internet would do what it always does to the familiar. I obviously can't play any of these, but if you haven't noticed, the Thomas and Friends theme song goes really well with rap music. This isn't even a new concept, as the first remixes started popping up as early as 2006. One specific Biggie Smalls mashup has become iconic in its own right, as the altered piece is now associated with the title. Coming from the mid-2010s MLG and YouTube poop era, a very specific time in internet meme culture, full of weed, trick shots, flashy animations, and all the loud sound effects you could ever want. Thomas would have his own dedicated videos in this genre, but whenever I think about him being used for jokes, I always first think of Sets of Vanga Boys We Like to Party, with over 66 million views at the time of this recording. This nonsensical SFM animation starts off with Team Fortress 2 Scout and Heavy in a truck right next to Thomas the Tank Engine. While maintaining eye contact with him, They dance in sync to the song's lyrics before driving away, ending the video. No, that's not right. They're then pursued and attacked by an enraged giant robot Thomas while a bass-boosted version of his theme song plays. Now, this might not make much sense, and it doesn't, but that was the beauty of these types of videos. I can't say how many times I would absolutely lose it to this one alone. I can safely say, Skibidi Toilet has nothing on this. Thomas would show up in these animations and even have his own, such as animated versions of the Thomas the Tank Engine song. What I found interesting during research for this part is just how much of an overlap there is with our beloved Train and Five Nights at Freddy's, with some of these getting tens of millions of views. In contrast to how odd all of these could be at times, there was also the more mainstream format of inserting Thomas into scenes from movies. As you can see, the show has had such an impact that fans have put it into funny haha videos, so it's no surprise that it also appears in simpler meme formats and reaction images. One of the earliest ones being the Thomas O face, originating from one of the faces he expresses in the first 2 seasons. This was actually popular as both a standalone image and an aspect of YouTube poops. Flash forward to modern times, we have various other reaction memes from the show, such as this scene from the UK version's 5th season.
He replied, "The fat controller laughed, ho ho."
Or this one from season 2.
And he wrote in his notebook, "Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cow catcher in front to protect."
Or something like this one that's dubbed over with a completely new line.
"I'm banishing you to the Shadow Realm." No! Much better. "I'm banishing you to the Shadow Realm." Nope. Bother.
These screenshots are just a few of many that have become popular. But of course, the line doesn't end here. The franchise is included inside meme culture in a number of different ways, even with whole communities built around it, full of tens of thousands of fans creating it all. But one of my all-time favorite community-made ongoing Thomas memes has to be
What do you see? It's in the clouds.
Ever since he was first introduced in a Skyrim mod, Thomas has appeared in a very wide variety of games, rivaling the popularity of Shrek and CJ respectively. He's sometimes even included multiple times in a single game, such as here in Sekiro. There are also those that don't have him as an unmodified static model, such as this fun one in a Dragon Ball Z fighter game. And on the opposite side of that spectrum is this horrifying mod for Resident Evil 8's Lady Dimitrescu. A trend that I've seen with lots of these is how he's so often portrayed as an enemy, a danger to you, the player. In all his other portrayals, he's harmless. He just wants to do a good job and wants everyone to get along. He wants to be your friend. But here, taken out of his world, he's hostile and dangerous, forcing you to try to take him out. That's why I really appreciate this mod from Breath of the Wild, where he replaces the horse, therefore letting you ride him around. You're letting him help you. It's what he would have wanted. But what does Thomas's owner think of all this? No, not Sir Topham Hatt. Sorry to break it to you, but he's not real. I'm talking about the super toy manufacturing corporation, Mattel. As a company, they were worried about how their IP was being used without their permission. Their concern being Thomas's portrayal. So, they set out to make an example. They went after the original creator of the Skyrim Thomas mod, Kevin Brock, aka TrainWiz. He's a prolific modder and even included Thomas in other mods, such as having him be many different things in Fallout 4. That's why Mattel didn't stop at Skyrim. Despite his mods being free to download and Brock not making a cent directly from them, Mattel really wanted to legally take him out. As Brock put it, Mattel pretty much wants me dead at this point. It's the reason why the Fallout 4 mod can't be found on any normal website. I diminished the brand of Thomas by showing him blowing up. Nothing about him violently murdering people. They issued takedown notices on the videos for it. The first time, it got taken down. The second time, YouTube told them it was covered under parody law, with no prompting from me. Although they tried, Mattel failed at subduing the modding ambitions of others. The internet proved resilient as a number of popular Thomas mods have been released since this mid-2010s incident, and it has absolutely no sign of stopping. Think about any upcoming PC title that you're excited about. It'll have him. Future games will have Thomas in them. And no matter how badly Mattel doesn't want it, there's no stopping that. Kevin Brock explained this best. The collective consciousness of pop culture decided that mods equal Thomas the Tank Engine. Everything that can be modded now at some point has Thomas in it. To do something like this for once beloved childhood franchise doesn't come from nowhere. And for some, it's part of what defines them. Original characters are nothing new, especially for kids growing up on the internet. Popular fandoms have always had their own variations of these. Thomas and Friends is no exception. Some fans would even depict themselves as engines. Trained sonas is what they're called. And from what I could tell, unlike in lots of other fandoms, their own community would be so overwhelmingly welcoming to each other's creations. They're actually interested in each other. They're supportive and ask questions to get to know them better. And the creator responds to these questions in character. There's a sense of camaraderie here. And I understand if this all might seem a bit strange to you, but just know that these types of engine self-inserts started way before most of these people were even born. In 1991, Thomas's creator himself became a trained sona for an illustration in a Saturday Times magazine interview. Smiling, he stands next to two of his characters, nearly 50 years after creating them. His love for them radiates here. It's that same love that inspired fans to try their hand at making something unique. In the early years of YouTube, views were not a goal for users, as this was before anyone could even make money on the platform. They uploaded simply because they had something to share with the world. The first ever Thomas-related video was published on December 21st, 2005, of a set of toys at the Tomy Toy Fair, but it wouldn't take long for original work to appear. Kids that were growing up with the internet and had access to a handheld camera got to work. They made all kinds of videos with their toys, reenactments of scenes from episodes, or even their own original stories. Seeing as these kids were also growing up at the time, it makes sense that some of these stories were more on the non-family friendly side of things.
You little you son of a I'm gonna tear off your and shove them right up your.
Then we got our first animations, which paved the way to those SFM videos that were mentioned earlier. A notable mention from this era is Mad Bomber, which is arguably the earliest fan-made video out there. Although it was first uploaded in 2007 and later re-uploaded in 2009, it was originally created in 2000 by Australian filmmaker Leo Henry. This short film follows a completely original story where the engine group tries to figure out who the mysterious bomber is. Considering the time and type of video, the production quality here was amazing and helped it stand out amongst the rest. That's why the comments are full of people looking back at it with praise and nostalgia. That's sort of the same sentiment I felt looking through all of these old videos. They were seen by millions of people. View counts that were astronomical at the time. Again, this was an era before high quality videos were a regular thing. A time before people cared about thumbnails and SEO terms. These videos were the pinnacle of authenticity. It's also worth mentioning that it wasn't as easy to make and upload these kinds of things as it is now. The barrier of entry was higher. Nowadays, it's not difficult to get a hold of an HD camera when our mobile pocket computers come with them. There are a number of free editing softwares out there alongside seemingly unlimited guides to edit and create content. So looking back at all of these, there was a certain charm to them that reminded me of what YouTube used to be. For the hours that I spent looking through these, I was brought back to a simpler time. They even, many years after their initial uploads, got chuckles out of me. Nostalgia had a continuous hold as some of these videos also recited jokes from other TV shows. Jokes that I've completely forgotten about. For example, this scene here with the phones was just word for word retelling a bit from an anime on Toonami called Bo 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 Bo.
Here, the call's for you.
This is a collect call from Grandma Hungover. Will you accept the charges? Hello, Top and Pooh. You heard the things.
Wait, he didn't mean you guys.
I wasn't sure where I heard those lines at first, but as the joke went on, it was like that scene from Ratatouille to me. I was actually enjoying myself while watching these videos, many of which were my first time viewing them. but I did see one that I recognized as soon as I played it. At over 37 million views, Thomas's Day Off by Thunderbird Studios is a partially 2D animated video depicting Thomas trying to get some rest after a long night's work. But back at the shed, his sleep keeps getting interrupted by different characters singing a number of different songs, like Peanut Butter Jelly Time, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the Johnny Bravo theme, and some Hatsune Miku, amongst others. After this trip down memory lane, I took a closer look at the channel and was surprised to see they were active as of 3 years ago, with the vast majority of their content being about Thomas and friends. After the initial Thomas's Day Off, they went on to make 3D reenactments of the official stories, followed by their own original ones. It was really interesting seeing how their videos improved throughout the years as they spent more time on this, up until they released an almost hour-long extended retelling of Duke the Lost Engine. On top of fleshing out the characters, they also had a more cinematic approach to the story. While I was in the middle of watching, I checked the description and comments and realized that this was their last ever video. Allow me to get existential here for a bit, but when I saw this, something hit me. Up until this point, the day I'm writing this, I only ever saw that first video of theirs when I was a kid. Between that time, we lived our own very separate lives. They had 10 years of putting together videos, 10 years of building their trains community, 10 years of improvement. But for the both of us, in that time, we've had 10 years of life, full of celebrations and hardships, smiles and frowns, highs and lows, 10 years of brand new experiences, good and bad, and throughout that time, thinking back on my own life, at any given point, I can't imagine being that dedicated to a single thing for that long. Not as much as this channel has to this franchise. And they're not alone. There are lots of channels out there that have years of Thomas and Friends content. Their videos have evolved beyond the simpler style of the old YouTube train space. They now have a wide range of content from commentary to physical creations and a variety of different animations. Some are even included in the official Thomas and Friends YouTube channel as members of the Thomas Creator Collective. Years of dedication just to one franchise. That's how much this series means to these people. I was taken back by the size of this community a bit because I honestly haven't thought about Thomas much since I was a kid. I've seen the memes and footage of the mods, but that's pretty much been my only exposure to it. Oh wait, no, that's not true. There's one more aspect of the community that I've seen flourish. The reason I started this video in the first place. There I was, another night of struggling to fall asleep. Tossing and turning, my mind was restless. It was just thinking about what the next big video should be. A video game? A movie? TV show? And then, it came to me. I found it. There's something inherently uncanny about Thomas and Friends. In the world of character design, circles and round edges are meant to instill a warm, non-threatening feeling. Basically, circles are friend-shaped, and you see that in the design of the trains, with their round and soft faces. But that's the thing, those squishy faces are on inanimate objects. This can cause our brain to experience a minor feeling of the uncanny valley, which, if you don't know, is when we're unsettled by the way a face looks because, although it resembles a human, it's not exactly realistic enough to be human. This is why, for a select few, they genuinely couldn't watch the show as kids because the faces creep them out. For what it's worth, that feeling is overwhelmingly kept to a minimum by the show. It strikes a good balance. It's not as stylized as Cars, and it's not as visually unappealing as JJ the Jet Plane. Yeah, I'm really sorry about reminding you that this exists, but we as a human race have to all be reminded of our sins. In Thomas and Friends, the faces are proven to be non-threatening because of the child-friendly environment that surrounds them. But what if you take the trains away from that environment and bring them into the real world? As part of the face swap trend, parents would swap the face of their child with the face of a Thomas toy, resulting in these nightmare fuel pictures. That uncanny valley feeling is in full effect here. But let's scale it back a bit. Aside from toys, there have been many instances throughout the years where Thomas and Friends have been brought to life, from small park attractions to fully functioning trains. Taken out of the world of the show, the faces look pretty good in real life. But that's only these exact faces, because if they're altered even just a bit, that illusion of childhood fantasy shatters. We see that in the form of multiple kinds of bootlegs, and in one specific scenario, the ruins of a ride from Japan's Nara Dreamland. There's also this famous picture of pareidolia, which is when you see a face where there isn't one. It's stuff like this that has inspired artists to take the concept of Thomas and twist it. They apply different sides of logic, such as this one where an unfortunate cow ends up on the tracks. We realize that we never really considered the possibility that Thomas and Friends could also use their mouth to eat. Then there are ones that try to explain his origin. What exactly is Thomas? What if he wasn't the engine? What if the engine was just a shell? A shell that he could abandon? What if even his face wasn't actually his face? The human imagination is truly being pushed to the limit here. We've taken an innocent symbol of childhood and turned it into a monstrous creature. And it doesn't stop at art. All those horror elements are transferred over and enhanced in video format. Visual effects artist Tom Coben created this depiction of a spider-like Thomas back in 2019, and has released multiple videos in the Engine of Chaos series. They revolve around Thomas terrorizing Sir Topham Hatt, who's trapped in a sort of purgatory state as he's eaten over and over and over again, but never allowed to die. He's forced to be put into this position, to be hunted down. He's eternally the prey. That is, until the most recent video, which was posted a few months before this script was written. Sir Topham Hatt finally finds Thomas's den. Scattered about are debris, uprooted rails, and a discarded engine. That has troubling implications considering that, in these videos, the engines are the shells these creatures use. After Thomas emerges, the hunt begins once again. Desperate to hold out for as long as he can, the frightened conductor hides in a construction site. That's when he spots something. Finally, he could fight back for once. He walks around and inadvertently gets Thomas's attention. This is his moment. He can't mess this up now. He rushes to light the dynamite and, with all his strength, tosses it. It's not enough. He doesn't run. He plummets, accepting his repeated fate. There's a great quality of animated videos like this out there, no doubt inspired by this series. I want to focus on one in particular. This is Chuga, who started out by making backroom videos, but as we've seen many times so far, Thomas finds a way in. He does so in a unique way. Take for example, their first dedicated Thomas video that doesn't reference anything else. It comes in the form of a 1981 news broadcast that shares details about the disappearance of two boys who happen to have been recording. On a night out, they wander through a train yard where they spot Thomas. One of the boys, Daniel, is too scared to get close, so the other, Adrian, decides to go alone. The screen switches back and forth between their cameras as Adrian closely examines Thomas. He even climbs up on top of him. But that'd be the last mistake Adrian makes. Chuga has since created different styles of videos, from interactions between Thomas and Sir Topham Hatt, a confrontation between Thomas and Lightning McQueen, to showing what's really inside of Thomas, and even imagining what if he was a thermonuclear bomb. But what I keep coming back to are these types of analog horror videos. There are some in the form of an actual VHS episode. The first video in the Thomas and Secret series has him traveling at top speed while a narrator explains his urgency to get to work. And everything plays out like a regular episode would until...
After a long drive, Thomas decided to stretch his neck. Wow, it's so big.
And then Thomas spots something in the distance that has him shocked. And before we know it, we find out what it was.
Bang! Explosions! Bang! Sparks! Blood! Bang! Bang! Guts! Bang! Screams! All mixed into one terrible sound.
Afterwards, the narrator keeps his composure and speaks casually again. Also, this happens. Then there's Curse Percy, which follows the same format as the last mentioned video. The narrator explains that Percy is going through a swamp to get back home, but something stops him in his tracks. Another train. But something's wrong. The train looks just like him. Face to face, the imposter does the impossible and takes out its own eyes and then splits in half. The last videos from this channel I want to mention are these fake product commercials that get increasingly more and more unusual, especially this one of a fictional gray tube of cheddar based on different characters from the show. Its creepiness works very well in this format. I don't think this would be as unsettling if it wasn't depicted like an old TV commercial. It reminds me of being a little kid and waking up in the middle of the night, tuning in to Cartoon Network without knowing that the channel becomes Adult Swim after dark. Everything I've shown just merely scratches the surface of the train horror community. There's still so much out there, so much that's still being made, and it doesn't seem like that'll slow down anytime soon. I really do recommend you go down this tunnel a bit by yourself after this. But before we move on from horror content, there's no way I could talk about this stuff without mentioning a certain 36-minute long mockumentary. The story starts with a German scientist named Wilhelm Gotze, who worked for the German government at the start of World War II. Although he claimed to not know what the ruling party was up to, he in reality was a top advisor. However, his experiments were so abhorrent and unpopular that it put a target on his back from within his own party. So he and his family had to flee to Sodor. He would then take his son, Hans, under his wing and teach him everything he knows. Hans's most successful work would end up being biofusion, specifically combining the organic body with machinery. Eventually, he would start his own company, Sodor Research. It became very successful and quickly grew in size. Hans would then fall in love and have a child named Thomas. And Thomas loved trains, specifically steam trains. He'd be there at the tracks every single day, despite how much of a jerk the comptroller was. But one unfortunate day, Thomas got too close. Hans absolutely lost it and shut himself off from the world in his lab, in Shed 17, where he strictly forbids anyone from entering. Their town was a small town, so people wondered why they didn't have a funeral for Thomas, why he didn't even go to the hospital. About a year later, Hans was ready to unveil to the world his scientific breakthrough. Thomas and the engine were fused together. This is what Sodor became famous for, and Hans would get many requests to do the same for others, but he'd reject them all. Sir Topham Hatt saw a huge unmet market here and would buy enough shares to initiate a hostile takeover of Sodor Research. He immediately started accepting cash for these operations. However, safely mixing humans with moving machinery that gets very hot is no easy task, so the end results don't always go well. This of course was all kept under wraps as the company was making a ton of profit, as the successfully transmutated trains would then go on to work on the tracks per their original agreement with the company. They would also star in a very successful children's TV show alongside Thomas. Their base technology would also be sold to other companies around the world. Business was booming. But why did all the other vehicles have so many issues? Why was Thomas, the original, so perfect? Well, this one night, when Henry was transporting the wreckage from a covered-up accident, the tracks were improperly set, and he had unknowingly gone to Shed 17. Once the doors were open, he was terrified by what he saw inside and quickly backed away. What did he see? What was in there that scared him so much? This is a good point to stop here. Even though I've gone over a good chunk of the plot, there's still a lot left there to experience. For example, I don't really get creeped out by stuff. I am desensitized by horror. So trust me when I say that things after this point get unsettling. Hopefully you're now interested enough to check out the whole video later. Shed 17 was released in 2015, making it really ahead of its time as most of the horror videos that I've shown are post 2020. In this current age, the need for Thomas horror is insatiable. It needs to be turned up a notch. It needs to be interactive. So fans took that into their own hands. They created video games around this idea. They were committed. And none more than Gavin Eisenbeis when he released Choo Choo Charles in 2022. As you could see, there are obvious similarities to other videos I've shown. In fact, Gavin himself has cited Tom Coben's animations as a big source of inspiration for this project. Probably also from the Stephen King children's book Charlie the Choo Choo, cause you know, names. But let's take a moment to realize just how far we've come. From creepy drawings to creepier videos to a fully fleshed out commercial game that got tons of media attention, even being one of Time Magazine's most anticipated games. We really have come a long way in depicting a childhood icon as a monstrous beacon of terror. He's been molded into the stuff of nightmares, a grotesque display of childhood rescinding. It really is a good thing that that's all he is here, nothing more than pixels on a screen. Thomas can't hurt you. Not out here in the real world. Right? Thomas being fused with other things is by no means a fresh concept. I even found an Etsy store that puts his face on refurbished Furbies. These are real. You could buy them right now. There's also this bottle cap of his face that you could 3D print so you could firsthand experience whatever feelings come from seeing this. That same person also made other stuff. But let's talk about the star of this segment. Why Nakajima? For almost a decade now, they have been putting together these machines. Memorable creations that bear this iconic face. Some are even armed. They're equipped with sharp knives, functioning lasers, a flamethrower, and even a gun. Take a moment to realize that you live on this planet at the same time as this. But what if you don't need a small weapon? Not to worry, because there's something out here for your Thomas related needs. Would you like to relieve some stress? Use a fidget spinner. Have you ever wanted a pet? Get a fish. Do you need a new automatic vacuum? You're in luck. You want some wheels? And don't even get me started on how Why Nakajima presents themselves. This is their VTuber form, and I'm gonna give you a moment here to imagine what their outfit looks like when they're on camera. I guarantee you, what you're thinking right now won't even come close to it. Okay, you ready? No, you're not.
はい、皆さんこんにちは。中島です。
That's just amazing right there. I'll also have you know, when they got their silver play button from YouTube, they of course put a Thomas face on it. It's crazy to think that I only found this channel because they uploaded this video I showed earlier of 10,000 Christ versus 5,000 Thomases. Or is it Thomasi, plural? Like, you know, octopus, octopi? But returning to Thomas horror as a whole, why is there so much of it? When I first started this video, I only meant to focus on the horror aspects, but I found much more than I expected. And there's probably even more out there that I haven't found yet. Something that I mentioned in my Horrors of SpongeBob Memes video that also really applies here is how we've taken something from our childhood, an age of innocence, and transformed it in a way that its creator would have never imagined. As we grew up on the internet, our need to rebel increased. We, in our minds, had to prove that we're no longer children, so we used symbols of our youth to do that. Whether it be making the trains curse or making cursed trains. It's rooted in that feeling that we're no longer innocent children surrounded by the safety of our ignorance. We're part of the real world now. It's fitting that a reason why Thomas and Friends worked so well was because it didn't overly sanitize itself for children's sake. There were some scary episodes with some daunting premises, not to mention all the accidents that would happen. It even got to a point where psychologists were concerned, and the news covered that on TV. Not to mention the authoritarian allegations, where the worth of engines is determined by how useful they are. So if they step out of line or misbehave, they're swiftly punished. Smudger was a cocky engine that would repeatedly derail from trying to show off, so he was made an example of and immobilized. Turned into a generator, trapped behind the engine shed, forced to watch everyone else on the tracks. Henry got a new coat of paint and didn't want it to get messed up in the rain, so he hid in a tunnel. Even after the rain stopped, he refused to get out, fearing that the rain would come back. So the rails around him were removed, and a brick wall was erected in front of him until he learned his lesson.
And Gordon would say, poop, 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 serves you right. But I think he deserved his punishment. Don't you?
And I can't forget the mere existence of the scrapyard, the place that engines go to when they can no longer work. Lots of these early episodes were, of course, based off of Wilbert Awdry's original stories. So it really makes me wonder, what would he think of all this? He was somebody who wanted to be remembered as someone who knew what children liked and who knew how their minds worked. That's why he was able to speak to them so well through his work. And not just them, he had parents in mind too, since they were the ones that had to read those stories over and over again. Despite the more scary scenarios, most of the stories are more lighthearted. He wanted them to be a sense of comfort that ties back to the reason he made them in the first place. I'm not a parent, and I'm never going to be, so I can't imagine what it's like to see your own young child suffering from a sickness, that feeling of helplessness, as you wish you could take that illness upon yourself instead. If only you could trade places with them. And so you just do the only thing that you can. You do your best to try to help them. And that includes what Wilbert Awdry did. For a brief moment, take their mind away to somewhere else. A different world, a kinder one, where their imagination can frolic. It's that sense of comfort that he wanted to instill in other children. And decades later, even after those children have grown up, the stories and characters are still comforting. Nicola Kemp, the head of features from Marketing Magazine, once compared Thomas to a shark of all things. The reason sharks aren't extinct is because nothing is better at being a shark than a shark. No one is better at being Thomas than Thomas. He and the rest of the crew mean so much to people. It's that comfort in the familiar that I was talking about. You see that in every single thing I've shown you, in that wide area he covers. He's impacted us to a certain extent in different ways. You might have read the books or watched the show as a kid, and even if you haven't, you've probably seen these types of memes too, and they might have gotten a laugh out of you. Or the franchise could have been an obsession for you at one point, because you had good times with it and have since held it very close to your heart. Remember that Duke fan-made movie earlier? It starts off with a dedication to their late grandparents and beloved pet. Their passion project, those hours of work devoted to their loved ones, who they probably shared those good Thomas and Friends moments with. There are many fans out there who credit the franchise for how they came to be. That love is on full display online. There's actually an upcoming documentary that'll focus on that, appropriately called An Unlikely Fandom: The Impact of Thomas the Tank Engine. It's hard to think of a world without our favorite trains. It took many attempts for a show to even be produced, and we really have to be thankful for that effort because Thomas wouldn't nearly be as popular as he is without it, without the TV show. Whatever impact Thomas has made on your life, be it small and fleeting or huge and meaningful, we can't deny just how much his reach has been. So I think it's safe to say that, at the end, in one way or another, Thomas did in fact turn out to be a really useful engine. Thanks for watching.